All right, live. So now I'm going to press the other button and we're going to get to work. Here we go. And now we're recording. All right, awesome. So thanks everybody for checking this out. I apologize for not putting this in sooner, not getting this done on Monday as I promised. The material just wasn't ready. No, and I don't want to be somebody who sits here and like half does a thing if I know I'm going to have to do it more than once. So I thought instead I would just sit down and do it when I was ready. And here I am, ready. This is the first episode of How Do I Write This? Which is, I'm not really sure what to really compare it to in order to describe it if you don't know what it is. A lot of channels, a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of Twitch streams cover the basics, right? Here's how you learn how to play chess better. Here's how you learn how to play the drums better. Here's how you can use this piece of software. And they explain it in a way so that somebody with minimal experience can become proficient over time. There's still some measure where you have to go out and do your own thing, but by and large, you can watch this stuff and kind of get a handle on it. But when you go look over at publishing, when you go look over at the various book tubes and writer tubes and book talk and all those things, Bookstagram, you don't get a lot of how-to. You get instead, hey, look what I did. You get a lot of promotional stuff. You get a lot of, check out my stuff. Look at this. Here's what I think about this because I've done other things in the past. But if you really want to get into something, you're limited, incredibly limited in your options to maybe one or two different lecture series from one or two particular authors. And they're not bad lectures, but if you were learning how to do something, why would you only consult one source? Why wouldn't you want a breadth of information and a breadth of education so that you could put together all the things you wanted to? Because maybe listening to that one guy's 5-hour lecture, it's nice because, oh my God, he's a big deal famous author, but he's a big deal famous author who sounds like a big deal famous author who sounds like him. And there's no real course or strategy that for free where you can just go from beginning to end. Certainly not in a digestible way. Certainly not without like, hey, if you have $10,000, do you want to join this group where I'm going to badger you for 90 minutes once a month? Because that's impractical. So I wanted to create sort of a real straightforward discussion piece about what they're actually supposed to do, what you can do, what the publisher is looking for, how to make this happen, how to write it better, so that the only thing I can't account for, the only thing I can't do anything about is, well, you have to still sit down and write. I can do a load of things. I can teach you a load of stuff. I can't do the writing for you. I'm leaving that to you. I'm trusting that to you. But outside of that, I want to give you as many tools and as many keys for every genre so that you can find all the strategies you want and all the success you are interested in. Now, I should point out, the original conception of this was to do a lot of short material, like 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here, 30 minutes here, maybe 30 minutes. But lots of little bursts of stuff. How do you do this? What about this? What about that? And I still might. I don't think I'll call it How Do I Write This? I might do something else. It might just be, like real short clips on YouTube. It might be something animated. I don't know. I know there is definitely a space I want to work in that kind of hyper instructional stuff. But for now, here, you and me, today, weekly, randomly, wheneverly, I want to help you write. I just want to help you write. If you've been here before, if you've listened to this before, well, you know how much I love to talk. And you know how much I love to answer questions. So I'm hoping, hi guys, I see you in chat here. Hey, what's up? Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope to make this worth your while. I love questions. What is probably less known is that I fundamentally enjoy explaining things. Like I'm really good at it. I enjoy it. It makes me happy. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to really sit here and walk through some of the most minute details, but make them make sense and try and address in advance some of the issues that come up when people are told this is how things are, but when you ask why, you don't really get a satisfactory answer. I want to make sure you get a satisfactory answer tonight. So, how do I write this? Does one genre at a time. And we're going to start with a biggie. We're going to start with fantasy because we need to start with a biggie. That, and I think a number of people writing fantasy are doing okay, but they could be doing a whole lot better, or they're not doing great at all, and they need to get to that point where they're doing better. I don't think fantasy is a bad genre. For the record, I don't think there are any bad genres. I think there are, however, oodles of not great writers. And whether that's because of skill or craft or ego or fear or whatever, yeah, I generally tend to think that if you give the right kind of motivation and the right education, targeted in the right way, and make the material practical, you can get, at the very least, a baseline level of skill. It might take you longer with some than others, but you can at least get everybody to like a baseline middle of the road. Some people will excel, absolutely, always, no problem. But by and large, you can get anybody to baseline. And that's where I want to start, and then I want to build from there. So I want to go over the basics of fantasy. I'm not going to sit here and get bogged down in the genre definition because I don't know if you know this. It's fucking huge. The definition of fantasy covers everything from urban fantasy to high fantasy to low fantasy to modern fantasy to fantastic, science fantasy to fantasy of desire to fantasy of despair to, in some cases, horror, depending on how you want to, split the story cake into story slices. Fantasy is big. And I honestly think right now, in 2021, at the time of recording this, if you were to stop and ask some publisher how to define fantasy, you would either get a real broad answer, or you would get just the sort of like, well, this is what we publish, so this is fantasy. Or, I don't know what it is in specifics, but I know it when I see it kind of answer. And I have found that to be the least satisfying thing possible. That's right up there with, a parent saying, hey, don't do that because I said so. And I'd like to take the teeth out of that statement. I'd like to make it so that whoever you are, wherever you are, you know what the hell it is you're writing. And you know what it takes to write it. And you know how to write it better. And you know how to put it together in a way that can be engaging for other people. So, fantasy. Big, giant umbrella. Maybe the biggest umbrella? Certainly one of the top 3 big umbrellas. An umbrella in publishing is a genre or a style of writing under which sits loads of other subgenres or whole genres entirely. Your 3 big umbrellas generally tend to be fantasy, science fiction, and romance. Other things like horror, thriller, legal thriller, they tend to sit under their own umbrellas. I guess thriller might be the 4th umbrella, but usually we skip the big picture and go to the small picture, I think, a little too quickly. But by and large, fantasy, big old umbrella, loads of stuff underneath it. And yes, just in case you were curious, if you're writing in one of those subdivisions under the umbrella, you're covered by the big umbrella. That's going to be important later when we talk about how to query and market. But for now, it's okay if you just call yourself a fantasy writer, even if you're going to get more specific later. When in doubt, broad is just fine. That's going to be item number 1 on our list. When in doubt, broad is just fine, as long as you're clear about it. But I want to start where all stories start. And I think this is going to be one of those sections that really gets repeated a lot in this whole series, because it's universal, independent of genre, and that's idea development. It's one of the things I like to spend a lot of time in. There will be at some point, I will do like definite breakdowns, but if you go look on Twitch or you go look on the YouTube channel, you can find specific, like, hey, here's 2 hours where I talked about this thing, or 2 hours where I talked about that thing. By the way, that's not going anywhere. Somebody asked me earlier today if this, what I'm recording right now, is going to replace the other stuff. It's not. It's just going to add to it. We're just going to throw more shit out there. We're just going to talk into more microphones and make more notes. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming in. I did not say hello to you when you first came in. I apologize. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. Idea development. What idea do you think you should put the most focus on relative to all the number of ideas you have to create for a story? Where do you think gets the gold star? Where do you think, if you're writing fantasy, where do you think the attention needs to be paid first and most? Usually, when you're talking to a fantasy writer, you're going to get one of two answers. You're going to get a character, or you're going to get world. And they're going to say, well, because a character, you need a character. Characters drive story. They do. And it's almost always a safe bet to say you want to make sure your character is well-defined, your character is focused, your character is dynamic, and they'll use lots of other adjectives like that. And that's not bad. That's honestly, that's where I would answer. I think putting your eggs in your character basket is absolutely positively the right way to go 90-something% of the time. And I think a lot of writers are really quick to dismiss that. I'm not sure why. Sometimes I think it's because they fixate on a really simplistic kind of character development, or they only do it a certain way and only do it to a certain degree and just kind of make one of those statements like, I'll fix it later. And then later comes and goes and they don't make any fixes, and it's just kind of like, well, that's what I have. Or they only envision the character in one certain way. Like they picture a particular actor playing them in the Netflix or Amazon series or something, and like that's just what they see, and that's just what they write because that's just what they have. But if you were to go to this carefully constructed house of cards and blow on it, the whole thing would just crumble. Because there needs to be stuff when we build characters. It's not wrong. It's not bad. Characters, they're going to be the person doing the plot, whatever the plot is. So character's a safe choice. The interesting one is world. And you get this from particularly high fantasy writers, people creating an alternate Earth or a different planet or a different continent, people creating big old spaces for stories. A lot of people, and I'm not even talking to like my D&D gaming friends, right? Like my RPG people, I know you're there. Hi. You know that world building is just a fundamental part of gameplay. I'm talking to the writers right now who want to take it to that level, who look at stuff like actual plays for role-playing games, who look at the big, giant, omnibus 2,000-page super books and go, well, that's the level of detail I need in mine. It's not. It's not. It is not. You do not need to go to that length. We're going to talk about that when we get into the actual writing, but you don't need to clone the depth of detail in those big, giant books in order for you to have a good enough, big old air quotes, good enough book somewhere else. Your world building matters in fantasy more so than it does in other genre. For instance, your world building in a romance novel, it's okay if you go a little light on there, because the romance is not necessarily found in the mountains and the trees and the rivers and the strange haunted ruins just on the far side of town. Whereas in a fantasy novel, there is an expectation, no matter the subgenre in fantasy, there is an expectation that the world has complexity, lots of stuff going on. It has variation, lots of different stuff going on. And it has some amount of risk. It's dangerous to go over there where there's a lot of stuff going on. Those are the haunted woods. They're spooky. Something like that. Those three things drive world building to some degree, to some combination. It's not always going to be, 30-30-30. Sometimes it's going to be, 10-80-10 or 2, 3.95, but some combination of that is going to define the world building in fantasy. Now, I'm not giving you details, right? We're just going really big and really broad, right? It is dangerous to go alone. Totally take this. Yes. At one point, I was going to put that on a shirt, and then I found out that, especially on, I was on Redbubble at the time, like everybody tried to put that on the shirt to the point where Nintendo can't really come at you, but all the real like graphics and stuff are real derivative, and it just looked kind of boring. I still might slap it on like a sticker, just for me. But yes, it is dangerous to go alone. Take this. Back to world building. When we're shaping our worlds, we're going to follow the same structure that we use for all genre building, which is pretty much this, in simplicity. You're going to need to develop between at least three, between 3 and maybe no more than 12. Usually you can get away with like 3 to 7, but let's expand a little bit. Let's say you guys are being, super eager. 3 to 12 rules that govern the world. Now, when I say rules, if your impulse is to go to social structure, you've zoomed in too far. I mean rules that include things like it has gravity or earth physics apply. Big stuff, big picture stuff. Yes, it will include, socioeconomics. It will include governmental bodies. It will include, class systems and roles and all that stuff too. But don't dismiss the decisions in and around how does the air work. Now, that doesn't mean, I really want to be clear here, that does not mean you need to sit there and detail it in your story. You're not going to write a sentence where it's like, and then Bob breathed because breathing is good. Like, oh, I mean, I guess you could. It's not the end of the world if you do that. But at the same time, like, the reader, whomever they are, is going to assume some kind of Earth comparison, some kind of Earth analog until you say otherwise. And if you never say otherwise, they're not going to think twice about it because it won't occur to them. Because when we step outside of fantasy and we crack open any book, you go grab a Stephen King book, you go grab a Piers Anthony book from the 80s, up until the point where they start deviating with different cities and towns and stuff, you just assume you're on regular Earth. And until you hear about the robots or hear about the flying cars, you're going to try and picture something that is familiar to you as a reader, which means you're going to think about gravity. You're going to think about, well, that's the way water runs, and that's the way stairs work, and that's the way the sky is. As a writer, you can count on that assumption to save you a pretty big amount of writing to do. You won't have to reinvent physics. Just roll with it. Just take the default stock position on, it's got earth physics. I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out new rules for physics. Just, it has physics. It has gravity. It has a breathable atmosphere. Now, if you're writing a space thing, when we cover science fiction, we will totally talk more about this. But if you're writing a space thing and you need to specify, like, everything exhales yeast, then you need to do something about it. But by and large, when not told, a reader's going to assume an Earth analog. Why? Because a reader always wants context. They want to know how to position the ideas you're giving them next to the other ideas you've given them, next to the ideas they already thought about, next to the ideas they've picked up from other stories. Everybody's trying to constantly place and position pieces of the jigsaw puzzle so that the big picture makes sense. And whether we're talking about that big picture being your book or your series or your book compared to somebody else's book or books compared to television or, their Tuesday versus everybody else's Tuesday, everybody's looking to place context because it's from that context that we can develop comfort because we know how the world works. We know how this shit goes. Yeah, it's a Thursday. It kind of sucks. Okay, yeah, it's a Tuesday. It's pretty jumping. Okay, books work this way. Earth works this way. It allows a level of relaxation and an easing of concern that you might not have otherwise. So if you can get away with that in your world building, fucking do it. Absolutely do it. It's only going to make things easier to deal with. Beyond that, though, where you choose to deviate, where you choose more specifically to create rules for the world, hopefully you're going to do that because you want that stuff to show up in, you want to show up in the story with those points. I'm not saying you need to only include those things in the story, but if you're going to get real specific, right? If you're going to say, there's a spooky mansion with a spooky witch over there. Well, if you're going to that level of detail and you're going to give her a backstory and you're going to give her wacky adventures and some kind of future animated animal in a Disney cartoon, well, then, yeah, hopefully you're going to put the story in and around that stuff. Because otherwise, what are you doing? Why are you making up that level of detail if it's never going to show up on the page? You just passing the time? It's okay if you're passing the time. It's totally fine if you're passing the time. But if it's not going to go into the book, what are we doing? One of the things you can do at the early level of development is make it easier for you in the earlier stages of writing by making some concrete decisions and sticking to them. Because, and if anybody's a client out there listening to this, you've heard me say this a billion times, writing is the act of making decisions. You decide how things are. You decide how a character feels. You decide this is the shape of the planet. This is the shape of the continent. This is the way this works. This is how this sounds. This is how this looks. Those are your decisions. Nobody's going to take them away from you. Nobody can deny them. Nobody can disagree. You get to make them. So when we're building our world, make some decisions. You don't have to cover everything. You couldn't possibly. But think big picture down to small picture. What does that mean? Start with the planet. Go to continent. From continent, go to country or nation. From nation, go to region. From region, go to kingdom or nationality or state. From state, go to county. From county, go to town. From town, go to home. From blocks, go to home. Zoom in relative to however you are shaping this thing. And try to think about one rule that typifies or describes the stuff at that level. So if you're going to talk about the planet, you go, it has Earth-like physics. Great, let's zoom in. Continent. Okay, there are, I don't know how many, and it's okay not to know how many when you're developing ideas. It has at least 2 because I want one to be this way and one to be that way, and it probably has others. Fine, excellent. You just need a starting point. Because at this point in the creative process, no one's ever coming for these notes. Nobody's going to ask for them. They're for you. And if you need to go back and reverse engineer something, go for it. Do what you got to do. No one's going to know. But that's your world building. Big to little. Now let's jump over to character. The other big thing people swear about. The vast majority of people are going to fall into one of 2 camps. They're going to want to follow one individual character in the first person, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. And they're going to make this story pretty close to that character. They're going to give that character some kind of flaw or some kind of issue, some kind of goal. And the story is going to be about that character completing that thing or getting that satisfaction or dealing with a problem or something like that. And that's fine. Or, thanks to the popularity of loads of other things, somehow, someway, people have this idea that fantasy needs to be told in this big, giant, complicated, multi-layer, multi-person experience. And primarily that stems from television. That stems from big old HBO series and Amazon series and big Netflix things where there's a ton of money and it's a completely different medium that uses completely different rules. And you don't need to do that by default. In fact, if it's your first book, I would really urge you not to do that. Why? Because now we're going to go like way down this production line here and go talk about querying, especially if you're going to query traditionally or try to shop the book traditionally. If it's your first book and you eagerly tell everybody that it's multiple point of view and there's so many characters, the first thing the reader of that query is going to do is, oh, is this another tired Game of Thrones book? Oh, God, didn't we publish like 7 of these this year? And you've already started lining up the chips against you, which is not a habit you should be getting in. So don't tie yourself down to multiple point of view. Don't think it has to be big, because it doesn't. But you want to find a point of view that best suits the character you're using. If you want the reader to attach to that character strongly, if you want the reader to feel some kind of intimacy, some kind of connection, you want first person. If you want to show a lot of variation, if you want to show a lot of diversity and across multiple different things, whether that's diversity of identity or diversity of sound or diversity of tone or diversity of location or skill or something, then you probably want third person. And then you want to modulate that third person, affect it in some way, that maybe you want to go real broad and do third person omniscient, which is a nice, dependable way of crafting a story. Nothing wrong with that. But maybe you want to, take a little bit of a risk. Not so much concern, don't feel like you've got to master and move 18 puppets. Maybe you want to zoom in and just focus on a few. So you want third person limited. Now, I don't know. Maybe you're just kooky. Maybe you're just like, hey, John, I'm going to challenge. Like, I want to push myself here. What am I going to do? I want to do it in second person. Cool. Totally fine. Frame it in second person. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's going to be hard at times. But no matter what person you pick, no matter what point of view you pick, I need you to understand one thing. There are going to be times when you're writing where you are tasked or challenged to be cinematic, to think about the mental movie in the reader's head as they read a scene or see a description and picture something in their brain. But one of the problems, one of the downsides here, especially when I talk about you got to think cinematic or think about the mental movie playing in the brain theater, is that people also adapt the editing of movies. A jump cut, a match cut. The camera cuts away to somebody else and all of a sudden we're in a different place. Be very, very careful with those hard cuts. We're going to talk about those when we get to the editing revising stage. But be careful with them. Tread carefully, because it's a great way to mess up anything you've just built. Let's move on to plot. Oh my God, I'm halfway done. Shit. I am either moving too quickly or I've started in too low a place. There might have to be a fantasy part 2. I don't know. We'll see. Plot. There are how many billions of kinds of plots out there? Yeah, you can boil them down to the 43 original types if you want to be a nerd about it. But by and large, you want to set up a plot so that it has a chance to facilitate character growth. So the actions or events that the character needs to undergo in order to accomplish or settle the plot should in some way be related to, but not necessarily the same as, the character arc. It doesn't need to be the same thing. It can be, but it doesn't need to be. Don't panic. Don't think you've got to write, you got to figure out an arc that's exactly the same as the plot. And don't think you're going the other way either and doing yourself like, oh, I'm real clever because I've got the same thing. And your main plot is your character arc, which is fine. But if you're trying to show a big, giant, epic world, some of that world's going to get lost in the shuffle when you stay so closely focused on the main character. But when you're coming up with your plot in a fantasy novel, no matter the kind of fantasy, you want to think about 2 things. 2 things. And then everything else underneath thereafter. 2 things. 1, conflict. What exactly is opposing something else? What exactly is the problem? And how does this problem potentially get solved? How does it need to be solved? Does it get solved? What's the conflict? What's the thing causing the story to have some unease in it? Well, there's an empire. and this small band of peasant farmers is going to, lead a rebellion against them. Okay, conflict. There's immediately at least two sides we can bang against each other. And I say at least, and I do not want you to suddenly say like, well, I have 15 sides, because that's too many. It's okay to have two sides. It's okay to have three. It is not okay to have like 45 just so that you can say, I have 45 sides. There are 40. It's hyper complicated, because especially if you're new and you've got some issues with your craft, like the writing isn't that strong, and you end up with like, I have all this complicated shit. You're not going to do yourself any favor when it comes time to revise or get feedback, because you're just going to hand somebody a big complicated fucking story that makes sense to you, but doesn't necessarily make its way on the page. So when in doubt, dial it back. Really, think about the conflict. Not everything needs to globally impact everything. Not every issue is, and then the galaxy could end. I mean, I guess it could, but it doesn't have to. Like, dude, we're just out of milk. It's okay. Just the story can be small. The story can have components and different pieces in it. It's okay. But you want to think about conflict first and foremost, because that's going to help move the story forward. What's the conflict here? One side versus the other. About what? Why? How? And if you do some of that real hand-wavy bullshit, like, it's been going on so long, no one remembers, well, that's a real problem, because that's just basically saying, I don't want to make a decision, I'm just writing it this way and roll with it, because there's nothing to go with. You have to make a decision. Writing is the act of making decisions. You should know the causes and structures of things. So what's the conflict? Because when the story meanders, when it wanders, when it deviates over there and you kind of get lost in the weeds, it's that conflict, or one of the related elements of conflict, that's going to help pull it together. Conflict. Super important for a fantasy plot. Other big thing. I talked about there were two, right? Conflict and something else. Here we go. Stakes. What happens if we can't accomplish the conflict? What happens if we don't win? What happens if we don't get the thing we want to get? What happens if the army doesn't win the day? What happens if I can't throw the jewelry in the volcano? What happens if, it doesn't rain tomorrow? What are the stakes? What's being risked? Because the potential loss in those stakes, well, if I don't win, this bad thing could happen. I have to win this, else they will kill me. I have to throw the jewelry in the volcano, otherwise the world is thrown into peril. Whatever. The stakes are what help keep the character engaged with the plot. You would maybe not be surprised about the number of fantasy stories I have read. Not this week. It's been a good week. But in the last couple of years, where there's plenty of activity, plenty of shit going on. Oh my God, there's this, and oh my God, there's that, and this is happening, and that's happening. But there's no real sense of stakes. It's just everybody's busy. We're going to fight those guys. We're going to fight these guys. I got to go over here. I got to go over there. And there's no real sense of stakes. There's no real sense of danger. Like, well, it's going to be really tough. And then you read 2 pages, and all of a sudden, oh, I just had to move carefully. It wasn't very difficult. Stakes help contextualize. Remember, we talked about contextualization. Stakes help contextualize the conflict. Why is it really urgent? We do this because if we don't, ... problem. Now that problem, the stakes, that should be personal to the character. That doesn't mean immediately limited to the character. Doesn't mean it only affects the character. And it doesn't mean that it affects the character more than anybody else. It can, but doesn't have to. It just means that the character has a reason to try and not screw this up. The character has a reason to try and win. Whether that's defeating the evil king, or pulling the sword from the stone, or buying nachos, or fighting off the evil magical bear from another dimension, or whatever. The stakes and the conflict tie back to character. If you have global stakes, like, hey, we have to, whoever wins this big war gets to sit on the pointy metal sword chair. If your character doesn't have a reason or a want to sit on the big metal pointy sword chair, what the hell are they doing in the story? That's the main plot. You want to try and tie your protagonist, your main character, to the main plot, because otherwise it's going to feel like they're in a totally different story doing totally different stuff. So why not tie them together? Not so tightly that it's obvious. Not like all they do is just move towards this one goal. But at least give them a reason to go after it. Do not let your protagonist wander so far off the course of the main plot that you, the writer, or they, the reader, isn't entirely sure what the main plot is. This happens a number of times in manuscripts that go quickly rejected. Now, I've talked elsewhere in streams and in videos and in writers' chats about how to build a character. And if you want to go check that out, there's a great video called Characters, where I break down for 2 hours how to make them. Go watch that video. Not right now, because, hey, we're doing a thing. Pay attention. I'm enjoying the views you're giving me. Thank you so much for being here. But later, go check out the character video. It's really good, and I made a nice graphic for it. But with our character video, and we can then move forward to go, okay, so now we're going to sit down and write. We've got characters. We've got some world building. We've got some plot, some conflict, some stakes. Now we can sit down to write. This is going awesome. We're going to do great. And then we stare at the blank page. And we freak out. I want to right now, right this second, tell you how to eliminate the freak out. So take 10 seconds, tell all your friends, tell them to come all over, because they're about to find out how to not freak out. Ready? This one's good. You're going to like this one. I just want you to write one sentence about one thing that is either in the first room the character is in, or a feeling or statement the character feels or makes. I want you to start there. One sentence. Just write it down. Then, every sentence you write needs a friend, because it is dangerous to go alone. Take this. See how I tied that shit together? Clever. But your first sentence needs a friend. So give it a friend. Say more. And repeat this process, one sentence at a time. Take the picture that's in your head and translate it onto the page. You don't need to start with some kind of big, giant Encyclopedia Britannica, like, I'm going to give you 400 paragraphs about the nature of tree. Like, no one gives a shit. No one gives a shit. No one has any context for that. Starting off with a big, giant prologue, starting off with this sort of like big, complicated, I have to explain who cares? How are we supposed to understand this? That's why people hate prologues. Also, they don't work. But that's why it's not a great move. You want to start somewhere with something upon which a reader can build context. So start with a character, start with where they are, start with what they're saying, start with what they're thinking, start with what they're doing. Because that way you are guaranteeing your reader will attach to the character. And if it takes you, 3 pages to get through it, then it takes 3 pages. But if it took 30 pages before you decided to bring that shit up, you've missed the point of the exercise. One of the downsides in fantasy is what we in publishing refer to as the prologue trap. Now, just for the record, I personally hate prologues. I, personally, think they're a colossal waste of time, and any writer willing to write a prologue would be better served, taking off their pants and having some single person serving time, and they'd feel better and there'd be more production. Everybody's happier that way. Because it's about roughly the same activity. It's about roughly the same thing. You can either jerk off in 30 pages or jerk off over there. Which do you want to do? Prologue. Giant author masturbation. Check. The function there, because everybody's like, oh, well, it's a prologue. I got to set this stuff up. Then set it up in chapter 1. Just set it up in chapter 1. Chapters are arbitrary. They don't have any set length. There's no requirement for them. The only requirement chapter 1 has is to make you interested enough to go read to chapter 2. So why do you need this prologue business? Just go. Start the fucking story. What are you waiting for? Because I guarantee you, the louder you protest that you need a prologue, the subtext, the thing you're saying underneath the surface is, but I need the reader to know I thought about all this shit. I need the reader to know I'm really creative. You know how they're going to draw that conclusion? When they read the book. You don't have to impress somebody up front. This isn't the 7th grade. You don't have to stand there at the dance and be awkward. You can just roll up. You can just be there and do your thing. Just start your book where it starts. Don't overset my table. Just go. Give the reader some context. And you start writing. And we get to this idea of scenes and chapters. So let's address scenes and chapters. Look, it doesn't matter how many chapters you have. It's never going to matter how many chapters you have. It's not going to matter how long each chapter is. Chapters can be whatever size. You can have however many of them. They don't have to match. Done. Chapter section concluded. How many seconds was that? I bet I can do it faster next time. Chapters can be any size. You can have any amount of them. Doesn't matter. No one gives a shit. That's not true. You know who gives a shit? People in social media. They love to give a shit. Probably because they're selling something. But publishing-wise, don't give a fuck. Doesn't even matter. Doesn't even come up in conversation. It's, is the story any good? Is the character any good? Do you think we can sell this? No one cares if you have 31, 36, 42, 225, 1,000 chapters. Doesn't matter. What matters is if the story's any good. Don't get hung up on the chapters. If you're going to get hung up somewhere, get hung up on scenes. What's a scene? A scene is a little bubble. I want you to think about a bubble. And inside that bubble, there's a set of stuff going on. There's a set of events. There's a set of conflicts internal to the bubble. And that bubble positions itself, when it's done, next to another bubble. They touch. Troy, it's really nice to have you here. Thanks for being here. I'm doing very well. I'm describing scenes like bubbles. So, bubbles. Inside our scene, we have some things that are always going to be there. Some requirements regardless of the type of scene. Item number 1, and I know I'm going to say this and you're going to go, why are you telling me this? It's real obvious. Because there are some people who just don't get it. Item number 1 that you need in every scene, you need a character. You need at least one. Somebody's got to be there in the scene. It might be like, random people over there, but you need somebody in a scene. Even if the person in the scene is the reader, because you're, talking about how then the planet cooled. There's got to be somebody present, right? So you need a character. Second, that character needs a goal. They need to do something in the scene. They can't just stand there. They're not waiting for a bus, although waiting for a bus is, I guess, technically something to do. But they need something to do. If you're putting them in the scene, you're saying they're there. Why are they there? What are they trying to do? Next, in order to do whatever it is they want to do, they need to have a plan. Because how else are they going to accomplish what they want to accomplish? It's not going to make sense otherwise. So, then what? Well, you've got a character, and they've got a goal, and they've got a plan. They've got to try and do this plan. And they're going to try and do this plan until some other character or some other force something makes it not possible to accomplish this plan. Those are the basics. You need that in every scene. I don't care if it's two people talking. I don't care if it's a guy chasing another guy with a sword. I don't care if it's two ladies getting ready to murder somebody. I don't care if it's a bunch of dogs. Those are the basic things you always need. Period. Bar none. If you want to embellish, if you want to add some extra bells and whistles on top of that, the first thing you want to add is a sense of how easy or hard the character trying to accomplish the plan thinks it's going to be. Are they arrogant about it? Are they intimidated by it? Do they not give a shit? Are they indifferent? Are they thinking it's really easy, but in fact it's really hard? Are they going the other way and thinking it's really super impossible, but then they start doing it and they find out it's much simpler? How do you move that difficulty slider? How do you move that attitude slider? That's going to help them frame how they perceive what's going on and how they perceive their actions and how you roll the story forward. You want to add another bell and whistle? Fine, let's add another bell and whistle. In every location, in every scene, so all the places scenes take place in, there are advantages and disadvantages. Not everybody knows about them. Some are discovered, some are never discovered. But inside every scene, there are elements in that scene, in that environment, in that moment, at that time, with whatever else is going on, to make some things more possible than others and some things more difficult or less easy to accomplish than others. What am I talking about? Let's use a really obvious example. Let's suppose we're having a sword fight, and we're having a sword fight in a sword factory. One of the obvious advantages of this scene is that if we're having a sword fight, we've got all these swords around. That's an advantage. But if we're having just a regular gunfight in a sword factory, and we only have so many guns and not enough ammunition, then it's a disadvantage. Or maybe we're two wizards chucking spells at each other. And we've established that one of the rules of the world is that in order to, throw spells at one another, you need to be surrounded by elements. You need to have, like, if you're going to cast this thing, you need earth around you or fire around you. And if you're going to throw fireballs at each other, you need fire in the room. And here we are in a sword factory. There's blacksmithing forges all over the place. There's plenty of fire. Advantage. Maybe it's a sword fight, but, one of your British actors has the high ground. Advantage. Think about locations, think about scenes as having advantages and disadvantages. Think about them having characters. Think about characters having goals and whether or not those advantages or disadvantages can play into accomplishing that goal within that scene. So perhaps let's say if we're using our sword fight scene, our character goal is, hey, I'd like not to die. Please don't die. It's a great goal. Great goal. Works on loads of places. So if the character's goal is to not die, they're going to try and accomplish that goal by doing everything possible they can to not die, which means hopefully, ideally, we want to steer them into a fight because we're writing an action scene. So we have a sword fight. Now, if they're not the greatest swordsman who ever sworded, they're in for a hard time. And if they're nervous about it, they might think that this is going to be impossible, but then find out that maybe they're fighting an idiot who's also not very good at sword fighting. So they'll start off, thinking, oh my God, this is really hard. But then, because of the circumstance and the situation, they start feeling like, oh, I think I got this. You can affect story in that way. This isn't just a recitation of, and then Tommy did this, and Bob did that, and Susie came in the room and she said this, and then somebody replied, and then he said what? And then that happened, and then this happened. I want to break you of the habit of just recounting actions as though I am reading them one sentence at a time in some kind of like recipe, and by the end of it, I will have made a completed book. When you are writing, and this is super, super, super critical, when you are writing, the reader needs to feel like they are the invisible person as close to the action as you will let them be. So if you're in first person, the reader is half in the first person protagonist's head and half out. So whatever that first person protagonist is seeing, the reader should be seeing. Whatever they're thinking and feeling, the reader should be in the ballpark of what they're thinking and feeling. If you're in third person, you have a little bit more flexibility, but the reader should be the invisible person in the room. Now, whether they're floating on the ceiling looking down like a creepy ghost in a horror movie, or whether they're just standing next to everybody else as they're having a discussion, that's up to you, depending on where you want to position them. But by and large, the reader is the invisible person in every goddamn room, in every scene, for every moment. And if you want to zoom in and you want to, write in that cinematic style and write in that engaging way, the camera, air quotes, camera, that I want you to think about are the reader's two eyes. And if you're going to steer that camera, you're going to move that camera, I want you to think about grabbing the reader's head and moving it forcefully. They're an invisible reader. They're not going to feel pain. It's okay. You have their consent. And position their face, and you want them to look over there at that rock, at that tree, at that fairy, at that whatever, then you need to not just say, there's a fairy to the left. You need to turn their face and steer their direction and then describe what they're seeing. Move the reader's eyes. It's going to smooth out a lot of the imperfections in your writing. Think about that, especially in your long-ass paragraphs, where you're describing and then they felt this, and then they felt this, and then this happened, and then there was this, and then this event happened, and then they went back to feeling this. Where are the reader's eyes? Now, somebody out there is going to take me literally. Somebody out there is going to listen to me say this and go, well, how am I supposed to talk about what a character's thinking then? Okay, chuckles. Here we go. You can spend sentences, paragraphs, pages, chapters, whole fucking books for all I care, describing how a character feels and what they're thinking. But you need to be able to describe that non-visual material in a way that a reader can relate to it, not just know it. There's no quiz at the end of your book. So if you want to name check 15 created kings because you're on a lore kick, what's the reader supposed to do with that information? You're not going to hand a quiz and go, okay, in chapter 6, what were the 15 kings? Go. No. Kick rocks. That's not happening. What you want to do instead is, if you're giving them visual information, you're directing their eyes, you're steering their face, you're positioning them in however many dimensions to whatever degree so that they see what you want them to see. And when we talk about abstract things that don't necessarily have a visual component, then you are trying to take that information and relay it to the reader in a way that you think the reader can relate to it. Because they're not going to know the lore. They're not going to know the history of the Yuga Yuga tree and how it grows wild, and the snake people were the first people to, sort of harvest it with bark. They're not going to know that stuff. It might be very common knowledge in your world, but the reader lives in, Minneapolis and doesn't think twice about a Yuga Yuga tree. So you got to find a way of making the Yuga Yuga tree seem like a thing that a reader can fathom. So maybe you say to yourself, well, the Yuga Yuga tree, I'm basing it on, the rubber plantations in, South America in the 1600s. Okay, great. So find a different way to connect those two dots. That's how we synthesize these ideas. The reader wants context. And let me just address this real quick. This is where the writers fall into the research hole, this exact spot. This idea of trying to find human, earthly analogs to compare things to. And then they lose themselves because I want to get it right. I want to understand. I want to make sure you understand. So I'm gonna like dive deep on this information and then use like 2% of it. It is less important. Listen to me very, very, listen. Hey, right here. I like how the music dropped out for that. Thanks, music. Right here. It is less important for you to be hyper factually accurate if instead you are going to be emotionally accurate. What does that mean? It means this. If you are willing to be less critical about your lore dump, spend that time, space, energy, and words on how the character feels. And the reader's going to connect to that far more than going, oh, that's the 13th king born under the 13th harvest moon. Right. Instead, you can just describe how the king is born, burdened with this terrible tragedy, foretold at the moment of their birth. And they can go, oh, yeah, shit, that sounds fucking heavy. That's where you want to go. It's less about your fact. It's less about your ego. It's less about your creative imagination being spent and more about how can I engage this other person, this reader, and how can I move them? How can I affect them? And you do that in the writing process by prioritizing relationship, the connection the reader has to the text, the way you're steering their face, the way you're commanding their attention, the way you're partnering what they already know in their lives with what the new stuff is you're trying to get across to them. By marrying all those things together and putting your own special secret 11 herbs and spices, 11 herbs and spices, 12 herbs and spices, a number of herbs and spices such as voice and style and punctuation so that the reader can engage with the material. 13. I think it's 13 herbs and secret herbs and spices. I'm going to sit here and think about that now, which is really distracting, but I'll Google it later, I promise. All right. I'll put it on Twitter. I'm going to chug some water for a second, and then we're going to go talk more about writing, because there's some stuff in the writing I want to definitely cover tonight, because I see some of the people who are in here. So we're going to talk about prophecies, and we're going to talk about fated heroes, and we're going to cover some of the big-ass tropes in fantasy. But first, mouthful of water. Everybody good? We're doing okay? We're digging this? I'm not just talking to myself, am I? We're good? Everybody on board? Cool? Thanks for coming in, by the way. It's good to see you. Oh, that's good stuff. All right. Let's address some elephants, shall we? Where are my elephants at? All right. Elephants, let's go. Elephant number one, we're just gonna kick this thing out. Okay? Prophecy. When you think about a plot that is based in prophecy, I don't care what the prophecy is. I want you to see the word prophecy and think crutch. A prophecy limits the growth in the story because prophecies by nature have to be specific. That's why all the prophecies generally have such a broad, ambiguous, it could be that kid. It could be that kid. Ooh, as opposed to no one doubts the substance of the prophecy because usually it's tied to the plot. And you don't want them doubting the plot because otherwise they'll give up reading. But when you see a prophecy in a story, that's a crutch. Because you're saying the story's going to follow this line. It's 11 herbs and spices. Oh, shit, that's really good. It's 11 herbs and spices because there are 5 Spice Girls and 6 dudes named Herb. Oh, that's really that's good. Oh, that's super. Oh, God. Hell yes. Hell yes. Amazing. Thank you. I love this group. I love Twitch. Chugs is right. Twitch communities are the best communities. Love it. 11 herbs and spices. Fuck yeah. I'm writing that down. I know that sounds stupid, but it's going to come up later. 11. Cool. It's fucking. Thank you. That resolves like a huge 2-hour dilemma I would have. Back to prophecies, though. Woo. Okay. Prophecies put the story on rails because a prophecy has what's called a finite story destination. Even if that destination is, and then they live happily ever after, there's still a limited amount of space that prophecy can operate in. Do you ever notice that there aren't big-ass prophecies about, like, whole everybody's, it's always about one specific person, usually a protagonist, or a group of people, usually the protagonists, because you want to frame the story and the conflict in and around that prophecy so that the story gets followed. And that's fine. It's not bad to do, but it can also turn into training wheels pretty quickly. It doesn't guarantee tension. It guarantees an inevitable set of circumstances. Oh, this prophecy says that you're going to grow up and, be a king, so I just got to put some obstacles in front of that. It gives you a nice template, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with a template. But after a while, you're going to start questioning how you're going to subvert that template. If 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 + 5 is the expected map, how are you going to change it? And let's just address this real quick. When I talk about you needing to change it, it's not so that you can stand out and get picked in terms of submission. Change it because that's going to make you a better writer. Change it because you have something more to say than just the base lorem ipsum default text. Change it because you have something that only you can create and some story that only you can tell. Do not settle for the stock form of damn near anything. Yeah, there are going to be times where you take stock pieces by default and piece them together in new and exciting ways with your own instrumentation and your own embellishment. But by and large, do not settle for big wholesale chunks of, oh God, I've seen this a million times already. I'm already falling asleep. Prophecies can be a big pitfall for people. You don't always need one to guarantee that your hero acts heroically. Do you know how you guarantee your hero acts heroically? You write your hero acting heroically. No prophecy needed. The other problem with prophecy is that if you're bringing it up in the world, on some level you are guaranteeing it to either be completely right or completely wrong. It is very difficult to have shades of gray with a prophecy. There's two reasons for that. One, prophecies are a storytelling technique that sort of enables a story along a particular spine. If you're bringing it up, it's got to be there for a reason. Two, the number of other people who have written stories since the dawn of time involving prophecy or fate have influenced us now in the present day to where we've sort of explored a lot of the same territory. And there's an expectation that, okay, I've seen this before. I know how this goes. That's not your fault. That's just the nature of the beast. How do I say this? Don't hang your hat on it. Don't make it the thing. If you're going to do something with it, if you're going to bring it up, use it functionally. Use it purposefully. Do it for good reason. It makes a difference. Don't just trot it out because, oh, hey, I'm writing a fantasy novel. I better have a prophecy. Because you don't. Let's go stab another elephant. Metaphorically, not a real elephant. I know. It's a metaphor. It got away from me. It's cool. Let's go deal with another big giant red flag. How's that? Okay, we'll patch that up. You can stop making your face at the screen now. Next big giant red flag. Let's cover what are called sudden onsets. Sudden onsets are where writers try to get real clever real fast. Like, I'm your secret twin. Although you don't really see that in fantasy so much anymore. I'm your secret twin, or I've got a twin sibling, or nah, I'm really your dad. Stuff like that. Sudden onsets are generally attempts at triage. We create these situations of convenience. Well, I've only made 5 characters, and I know one of them better be the villain, so I'm going to pick the least assuming one because I only have 5, and the other 4 are spoken for. I guess it's that guy. Sudden onsets of any kind generally tend to reveal a weakness in developing. Like, you didn't think enough about enough stuff. So you get there to the blank page, and you're like, oh shit, how do I solve this problem? heck with it. I'm just going to go back and I'll shoehorn this stuff in. It'll work out in the end. That's a sudden onset. Think of it like duct tape. You're just going to duct tape and hope it holds together and then deal with it later, even though there will be a later and you won't deal with it. Again, it's not bad or wrong to do these things, but when you rely on them and say that, oh yeah, I'm making this story, it's really great, but we're seeing the same red flags over and over and over and over again, the problem is that you're not developing, you're not building a voice, you're not creating an authorial career for yourself. You are just creating a transcription of imaginary actions. This thing happened, then this thing happened, then there was a horse, then there was a chicken, then the sun rose and it was cloudy, and then somebody had a sandwich with 11 herbs and spices. This is why, flat out, if you are writing fantasy, I don't care whether it's adult fantasy, young adult fantasy, new adult fantasy, middle grade fantasy, high fantasy, urban fantasy, supernatural fantasy, science, I don't care. I don't care. But if you are writing fantasy of any kind, you better have an outline. I didn't plan for the music to drop just at that moment, but I'm really glad it did because it underscored my point. You better have an outline. In fact, I'll go a step further. You better have some kind of story Bible. A story Bible. If you weren't in the writing chat on yesterday, first of all, for shame, where were you? Haven't you heard it yet? It's up on YouTube. Come on. But a story Bible is a style guide, a world-building document, and an outline all in one. One big thing. Now, if you're a client, you probably got like a template from me because I make them for people all the time, and I just, here, use this, fill this in. It's super helpful. If you want to make your own, let's talk about that for 2 seconds. I find this works better in either a big-ass Word document or a spreadsheet. I made mine in a spreadsheet because I only use Excel to track taxes, so I better use it for something else. And it's a couple different pages. Really straightforward. Really, really easy. Here we go. Pages. 1 page. List of characters and all their names. All their spellings. All that stuff. It also includes some column or some note as to when they arrive in the story. If my story is already written and I'm doing this after the fact, which is fine, it's got the page number or the chapter number. And maybe it goes the extra step to say, oh, well, this is, Kevin, our main character, shows up in the beginning of the book in Act 1, Scene 1, and it even details it further. Kevin is busy trying to break into a vending machine. But first page, or one of the early pages in a story Bible, lists all the characters. Make sure you get their spelling correct. Maybe includes their physical description if you've got a lot of people. Not critical, but it can help. Second page, next page. Doesn't have to be in order, but next page. Locations. All of them. Start with the big stuff. Kingdoms, cities, continents, forests. Things with titles. Zoom it all the way down to like bedroom number 4. Hallway outside such and such and so and so. This is going to help you organize scenes later. List it all. Do you need descriptions for these things? Not in the Bible, because sometimes it's just going to be throne room, because you know what you're talking about. So we've got character names, and we've got locations. We're well on our way. Next thing, a list of conflicts. Take all your characters from that first page. Second column, what's their big deal? What's their issue? What's their problem in the story? Don't just do this for protagonists. I mean, they should be on the list, but the list doesn't only stop there. You got more than protagonists in your book, right? So we're talking about protagonists and antagonists and their sidekicks and that lady, 200 pages in who pours a gin and tonic. And then those random people walking in the back just to go from point A to point B before the rainstorm comes in chapter 20? If there's a person in the book, what's their goal? Yes, seriously, write it down. I'm not kidding. It makes it way easier if you do this now rather than doing it later or just saying, oh, I know what I mean. Yes, that's extra. You don't have to do that. Yeah, I get that it's extra, but if you do this now, it makes it easier. Write it all down. Take the time. Make the decisions. Characters and their primary conflicts. What's their deal? Kevin wants to become a world-famous UFC fighter. Billy wants to be taken seriously by his mom. Sarah wants to summon at least 2 eldritch horrors. Whatever. Do what makes you happy. Additionally, on this page, it might help you to list the immediate obstacles. As in, Sarah doesn't have an evil grimoire that allows her to summon eldritch horrors, and Kevin doesn't know the first goddamn thing about fighting. You're listing those because those are your seeds for your character arcs. Notice how we've tied those character arcs, and that's why we're doing it on this page of the guide. You've tied those character arcs to the characters as opposed to something external like a prophecy. Because when you put the conflict in the hands of a character, you create more agency. They can do shit. That's important. Agency helps create relatability to a reader, because a reader, I don't know if you know this, they like doing shit in their own lives. So if you're going to create that relatability, you can then create context. And what did we say at the beginning of this that every reader wants? Context. Next page. If you want, this one is entirely optional. It's a page of what are generally referred to as opportunities, which is this. List every scene, and then on the other axis, list every character, all of them, and then figure out where they intersect. Is Kevin in the scene? Is Teddy in the scene? Is Sarah in the scene? Is this the scene with the 11 people in the background? Just make a grid. That's why I did it in a spreadsheet. That way you can keep track of who the hell's in what scene. You would be surprised the number of fantasy authors who just have scenes where like people are in it, but you don't know what the hell the scene is doing in the plot. This is how you fix that problem. And we fix it now at this level as opposed to fixing it during the editorial level, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you don't want to fix it in the editorial level because that can open up other cans of worms. Because if we start ripping out whole scenes and you're like, but that's the scene where they learn the plot thing, that's really important. Well, now we got to figure out a new way to fix your plot. So we fix things at the concrete writing level. You build a better foundation, the thing stands stronger longer. Fix it at the foundational level. Fix it at the base level. Fix it in the writing so that you don't have to find your story in the edit. Don't get in that habit of relying on the edit to save you. Use the edit for what the edit is intended to do, which is polish the work and get it into its best shape when it's already in pretty good shape. It's going to make the editor a lot less stressed. It's going to make the job a lot faster. It's going to make the overall product much better, and it will move things forward. This is why the writing stage should be where you spend your time. Notice that part of the writing stage did not include, I'm going to get on social media and do inane contests. Because those things do not help you write. They're just not going to. They didn't do it yesterday. They're not going to do it today. They certainly won't do it tomorrow. When in doubt, if you're wondering, well, how do I get better at writing? Write your thing. Write your thing. Write your thing. What do? You write your thing. How do I build my voice? Write your thing. How do I get confident as a writer? Write your thing. How do I figure out what happens in my plot? Write your thing. It doesn't need to be perfect. It never needs to be perfect. It just needs to be written. You can make it closer to perfect later, but for now, 99% of the time, the vast majority of issues are just in writing. Just write it down. Pick something. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can always go back and change it later, but you gotta pick something. Just write it down. Just write it down. Just write it down. You cannot edit an empty page. That's a very good point. That is a good point. You can't edit an empty page. Put some shit on the page. Put some shit on the page. One of the reasons why I like using Twitch and then uploading to YouTube later is that I can just run my mouth and not have to worry about like, oh, I should really go back and edit that and put in like chicken sounds for my curses. And then I'm like, I don't want to sit there and edit 2.5 hours. Fuck that. So yeah, you can't edit a goddamn page. Just put words on the page. Give your sentences some friends. Let's talk more about the writing. So you've written this thing. How big should it be? Or you're going to write this thing. How big should it be? Or you want to know if you've written too much. Here you go. Ready? I'm going to give you a list. Get ready. Buckle up. If you are writing big, giant, epic fantasy, which, by the way, means that you have multiple characters, usually more than 4, covering a great deal of distance over a long period of time, with a lot of conflict and a lot of activity along the way. It's epic in scope. Epic fantasy of all kinds. Epic urban fantasy, epic high fantasy, epic low fantasy, epic science fantasy, epic anything. Starts at 100,000 words. And in traditional publishing, taps out at around 135, maybe 140 if it's like if you're on a roll, but aim for 135 is your very hard ceiling. That's for traditional publishing. Self-publishing, indie pub, the non-trad side, 100,000 words. Nobody's going around that. But you get a little bit more wiggle room. You can get up to 170. Why? Because the assumption is that the indie stuff, the self-publishing stuff, is held to a looser standard. And so you're afforded more wiggle room because the expectation is that you're not as good at it. Which is shit, which is patently wrong, but the expectation is there and the sales stuff is there. So you get a little bit more wiggle room. Ideally, the sweet spot for epic is between 100 and 120. Honestly and truly it is. If for some reason you've blown past 150, just think about, just have sirens go off in your head constantly because you've gone too far. Now, if you're one of those people who's like, oh my God, I just kept writing and the next thing I knew I had 200,000 words and it wasn't a planned thing where you're sitting there going, well, I know I have to pare this down. I know I have to pare it down. If you just wrote and didn't give a shit in epic fantasy, you've missed the boat. This is different. There is an editorial style called culling that says, write the whole goddamn thing. Write all of it. 200,000, 400,000, 500,000, 1 million words. And then when it's all out of your head, find the scenes that you want to keep. Find the plot points you want to keep. And then figure out the most efficient way to tie them together. And then think about or discover not so much the most efficient, but a little bit more flexible way to cover and cut everything else. It requires a harsh critical eye, and it requires you to detach from the darlings of your story. But by and large, it's a very effective strategy if you tend to have a big-ass story with a lot of stuff happening. It's not bad and wrong if I'm giving you these numbers and you're like, oh shit, my Word doc is huge. Yeah, it's fine. It's okay. I'm telling you this. It's fixable. Don't throw it in the garbage. Don't freak out. Don't have a panic attack. You just need to trim it. And if we need to do like a lot of trimming, there's a point, yes, where a lot of trimming, like if I have to cut like 200,000 words or 300,000 words or more, then yeah, we probably need to have a conversation about like next time you're going to rein it in. But anything where you're cutting less than 150,000 words, it's a pain in the ass, but it's doable. It's not as severe as it sounds. It's a lot of work. And I would recommend strongly that you don't attempt it yourself solo, but it's doable. But epic fantasy is the big end of the fantasy pool. Let's move to the other common parts of the fantasy pool. Let's go look at urban fantasy, typical high fantasy, science fantasy, and let's lump low fantasy in there too, right? Like low-tech, modern world fantasy or magical fantasy. Your range is a little bit simpler. It's also standard for both traditional and self-publishing. You need to break 80,000 words. That's your low ball, 80. And you're going to go as high as like 93 to 95. So we're still really close. We're still really close to that triple digit. We're still like within spitting distance of epic fantasy, but we're definitely not crossing into that big range. But that's a big space, 80 to 95, 80 to 93. You can do a lot of storytelling in there. Now, maybe one of you out there is asking, hey, but let's suppose I have like not those genres. What if I'm doing like horror fantasy? What do I do then? Well, okay, look, I'm assuming one of you out there is horror fantasy. I think one person said they were coming tonight who was writing horror fantasy. Here's your number. You get a totally different range because for some reason, horror fantasy still follows horror rules. I don't know why. I didn't make the rule up, but here it is. Horror's lowball is 65,000 words. Why? I don't know. It's been that way since like the 30s. I bet it has to do with a white dude. I am 99% certain it has to do with a white dude. 65 to about 90. 65 probably to 89. But you can take it to 90. It's fine. There's your horror fantasy range. If for some reason you're writing in a kind of fantasy that I didn't mention, or that doesn't fit easily into one of those categories, if you can keep it somewhere between 80 and 90, you're good. And if you're out there writing like a real niche genre, like fantasy of manners or farce or double structure political thriller, like you're fusing together like a Dragon Ball Z character, like multiple genres into like a hybridized thing, those word counts don't apply to you. Christian fantasy? Or just Christian in general? Christian fantasy is pretty straightforward. It's 70 to 82, 70 to 85. 70,000 words to 80, 85,000 words. Yeah, Christian fantasy, they stay in the 70 to 85 range. Because generally Christian fantasy is published in softcover, and it keeps cost down. Yes, cost is a factor for that. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So we're writing. While we're writing, there are some things we do not give a shit about. Okay? This is a definitive professional list. 1. Things to not give a shit about. Item number 1, no one gives a shit about chapters. We talked about that at the beginning. Doesn't matter how many you have. Doesn't matter how long each one is. Doesn't matter if they're all the same size. I don't care. I don't care what you read on social media. I don't care what the discussion was in the hashtag. I don't give a shit. Doesn't matter how many chapters you have. Doesn't matter how big they are. Doesn't matter if they're all the same size. I am willing to die on this hill. Just don't worry about your chapter count. Unless you want to arbitrarily say, like, I'm setting a goal for myself, John. Fine. But by and large, you have as many chapters as you need, and they're as big as they need to be. Okay? 2. And this one's going to be tough. Word count. I don't want you to care about word count while you're writing. I don't want you to care about word count if you're still writing. I don't want you to care about word count if you're still writing. I would rather have you write the hell out of your idea and then have to learn how to trim it and make decisions than hyper-consciously be aware of an ever-approaching ceiling even when you're miles away from it. Like, I've had conversations with people who were trying to write an 85,000-word book, and they break 12,000 words, and they freak out. Because at 12,000 words, they're, either way deep into their plot, or they've not even thought about plot. And they panic. Oh my God, I only have this much space. It's way more space than you think. When you are writing, when you are in the act of writing, and this is true for your first draft and true for your second draft, and for some people, hell, I will go as far as your third draft. Do not care about your word count. Okay? Last thing to not care about. Perfection. Put this one in big ass letters. It does not need to be perfect while I am writing it. It just needs to be written down. There will never be a perfect book. You've never written a perfect book. You will never write a perfect book. Nobody's ever written a perfect book. You've enjoyed books that you thought were perfect because they gave you a moment of connection, or they moved you or affected you emotionally or mentally or physically or sexually or socially or spiritually. And that feeling and that confluence of circumstance felt perfect relative to when it was happening. But the words and the text and the paper and the pages and the digital screen and all that stuff is just stuff, and it itself is not perfect. There is no perfect book. So you don't have to worry about perfection. You just have to worry about writing your thing down. So we write our thing down. 99.9999999% of you are going to do this in 3 acts. And that amount of people should be doing it in 3 acts. There's nothing wrong with 3 acts. It, contrary to what social media was talking about today, does not mean you're an idiot if you write in 3 acts. It just means you've written in 3 acts. Could you do it in 5? Sure. Could you do it in 7? Sure. Would you want to? No. Why? Because 5-act and 7-act are just 3 acts split up differently. It's all the same pizza. We're just cutting different size slices. 3 acts. Beginning, middle, end. Let's talk about act structure. We've covered this before, but we're going to cover it again one more time. Then we're going to move to editing, publishing, and marketing. And I'm going to wrap this thing up strong. Act 1 is introduction. Act 1 ends when you bring up the plot to your main character or characters. Act 2 is the development of the plot, the discovery of the conflict, and everything moves forward until it reaches the climax. Act 2 ends just before the climax starts, and the climax is the inevitable confrontation between the 2 elements or multiple elements in conflict. And if you have multiple conflicts, then your climaxes are layered. But the climax starts when that confrontation is inevitable, when the next thing we do starts the conflict. The climax is over when one side has won against the other. Either the good guys win or the bad guys win, whatever. Climax ends. The second climax ends, we move into the 3rd act, resolution, where we try to wrap things up, package everything nice and neat, and get us out the door. It helps tie up all the loose ends, or a majority of the loose ends, because remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, and we go from there. 3 acts. Straightforward. So we write this book, and there are going to be some people who don't like the next thing I'm about to say, and I am fully prepared to have you, depart. And if you do, I love you. Have a good night. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. If you're writing and in the middle of writing and the writing is going well, I do not want you to go get opinions from other people. I want you to keep writing. I want you to prioritize writing. I understand the temptation of getting somebody to come in and go, hey, your thing's really fucking good. I get it. I get it. I get it. But no, let it sit. Finish the writing first, then go get opinions. And I'm making a distinction between opinion and feedback. Opinions will just be opinions. Oh, it was really good, honey. I liked it. Oh, it was nice. Thanks. Cool. Those are opinions. There's nothing you can do about them. They're not actionable. They don't develop into anything. They're pats on the head. Good job. You did a thing. Yeah. Whereas feedback is what you go out for. Feedback is what you search for. Feedback is where you look for people whose combination of opinions and experience matter to you. Feedback. Feedback is ideally actionable. It highlights issues because you bring questions up. Hey, do you think this character works? In chapter 22, does the plot twist make sense? You're asking specific questions. You are not leaving something as complicated as feedback open-ended. What did you think of my book? Or what did you think about this chapter? Is not feedback. It's opinion. Because I can just simply say it's good or it wasn't good. And it doesn't necessarily tell you how to fix anything. But if you want feedback, what do you want feedback on? Does my character work here? Am I demonstrating agency? Does this dialogue sound like people? Do you get what I'm trying to do here with the metaphor? Feedback has a point. When you solicit feedback from somebody else, it's a transaction. And that transaction should be ideally reciprocal, but at the very least compensated. Pay your beta readers. Maybe money, maybe food, maybe both. Maybe you take their dog for a walk. Maybe you offer to help them in exchange with something else. Maybe you drive their mom to the store. Maybe you pick up their dry cleaning. Maybe you bake them a cake. Do something to say thank you beyond just saying thank you. It's nice to say thank you. Totally down for that. It's great. Do more of that, please. But they just did a lot of work. It is work to give feedback. Believe me, I make my living doing feedback. It's a lot of work. It takes time. Sentences are messy. Words are messy. Chapters are messy. And especially if you ask really targeted questions like, is my downward inflection in my dialogue represented well in my character given that I'm trying to simulate this accent? Or is my subtext developing my B-plot? That kind of stuff. Those are not simple questions. I wouldn't expect everybody to ask immediately more difficult questions from the jump, but I would expect writers to be able to ask questions about their work beyond just, do you like it? Do you not like it? When do you get this feedback? After the second draft. I know people have asked me lately, hey, when do I do this? Second draft. Let the first draft be your chance to get it all out of your head. And then start polishing it. We're going to talk about revising in a second. But then you start polishing it, and then you go bring in other people. If you've deviated from this, by the way, it's not the end of the world. It's fine. But if you're new at this, like totally new, this is a great strategy to get you started on the right foot. But let's talk about what it is you do when you revise. By the way, just to make this real clear, you revise your own work, somebody else comes in and edits it. That's the division. It's not necessarily like a superiority thing like, I'm an editor, I edit. No, I edit because I'm just not you. You wrote it, you're revising it. This is one time where the language matters. So when you're revising, what are you trying to do? Well, there's a couple specific things. And then we'll talk about publishing and marketing. And then we'll get out of here. And I should budget more time for the next one. Important note to me. But when you're revising, look for the following things in any order. You're going to do all these by the time we're done, but look for this stuff in any order. 1, all dialogue spoken between people or communicated between people if we're doing like telepathy or something like that. Anything communicated between two people should sound like regular people speaking. I don't care how high upper crust we're writing these fantastic super characters. Even if they don't use contractions, even if, they have a really affected way of speech. There should be a consistency in how it's written so that a reader who doesn't have that affect can understand what the hell they're saying. So you can get away with not using contractions, that's fine. But it's still got to sound like a person would say it in that moment. So exclamation point users, I'm talking to you. Nobody's using as many exclamation points as you think. That's the internet coming in at you. If you're curious, by the way, the answer is 3. You should have no more than 3 in a whole book. Enjoy that. Because not that many people scream. Because not everybody is all super excited all the time, and it certainly doesn't show up in exposition nearly as many times. But when you're revising, item number 1, you want your dialogue to sound like people because your readers are going to relate to your characters. Item number 2, your scenes should feed into each other. Scene A should lead into and feed into scene B. Why is B after A? Because it naturally makes sense to go there. We're not always jumping away. We're not always just randomly connecting our scenes. There should be a natural progression to our scenes. Every scene, like we talked about, should have a goal for the characters in those scenes. And those goals should be attempted until they cannot be attempted, i.e., until they accomplish them or until it's impossible to accomplish them. And next, the reader should feel as though they are present in all these scenes. They are the invisible person steered by the face to see how and where and when to the degree you want them to. Along the way, the next thing, there is a central main plot. And that over the course of the story, it is introduced, it is worked on, and it is eventually accomplished or overcome or resolved. That's an A plot. If there are subordinate plots underneath, like B plots, and they're there, then they are introduced, developed, and resolved. How many B plots? Yes. Generally, most people get away with like 1 B plot, definitely 1 main plot, and maybe between 1 and 4 B plots. Any more than that, and you're pretty much just trying too hard to go through the role and play the part of being a writer, you're overcomplicating the story for little to no reason. 1 to 4 is just fine. It's okay if not everybody gets a plot. This is not a video game, and this is not a LARP. If you have a C and a D plot past that, definitely cut your D plot. It's probably not getting enough attention, and your C plot's probably a B plot. You're just not framing correctly. Last thing to look for in revision, on a scene level, it's that you've treated this like the reader can picture everything. And on a world building level, there's consistency. You don't suddenly hopscotch all around locations. You don't suddenly invent new shit. You don't suddenly forget that, oh, hey, yeah, we're supposed to be having this argument in a store or in a building or in a place, and there's non-human being, non-bipedal, non-protagonistic characters. There's stuff in the room. We're not just operating in like a weird, like, all-white holodeck. Those are the things to revise for. For all else, get an editor. So let's assume you get it edited. Let's assume you get it revised. And then maybe you get it edited. I'd like you to get it edited. It would really help. Because editors are people too. But you get your book in its best shape. You get a choice to make. And this is the point you make the choice. This is something you can do earlier if you want, but this is a good moment to make that decision. This is where you either start querying and go traditional, or you start marketing and go indie self-pub. This is the fork in the road. Right here, right now. If you're going to go traditional and the manuscript is in its best shape, and you know it's in your best shape when any changes you would make are primarily more cosmetic than developmental. And if you're going to start adding extra things, you're just going to complicate stuff. Like, it's a superficial change, or it's I got to tear this whole thing out and rewrite it. It's one or the other. They're very extremes on the scale. If you're at that level of I could do this, I could do that, the thing's fucking done. Learn to leave it alone. But if you're going to go query it, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. Please understand that you're going to want a digital release more than a print release because paper and cardboard are in short supply globally, and shipping will take forever. So just plan on a digital release. It's fine. But what you want to do in your query letter is not give a book report, but instead speak about the appeal of the book, because the transition, the switch to flip when querying is that you are a little bit, some percentage, talking about your story as a story. This person does this for this reason with this expectation. But you're also talking about your book as a product, a thing to be sold. You're able to talk about it in non-story terms. It has this many words. It's this genre. It would appeal to people who like A and B and C. It's thrilling. It's dangerous. It's sexy. It's boring. It's whatever. Yes, you can use the word boring in a query. You got to write a certain kind of query for it. But you're able to cross those two lines, cross those streams, and develop a query that is between 7 and 250 words. And it has all the things we've talked about when we talk about queries. It introduces a character, it introduces the stakes, it introduces some emotional potential, and it includes things like the title and the genre and the word count. If you're going to go traditional and if you're going to query, you don't necessarily want to start marketing the book to possible consumers because you're in the middle of querying and you don't know who's going to pick it up and you don't know how they're going to take it in whatever direction they're going to take it. And it might be a while. Like if you get signed, it might be 8 months before you even get a release date. For a number of reasons, most of them financial or political. But if you are querying and traditionally publishing, it's going to take a while. And your first 20 to 30 queries are going to be terrible, and you're going to get a lot of rejection. And this is going to help thicken up that skin to make you sort of resistant to the idea that all writing is glamorous and all writing is simple, because this is a job. Once you go query this thing, this is the job you are basically interviewing for. So long as you never publish, so long as you never send it out into the world to go be a real book, it's just for you and it's just a hobby and there's very low stakes. But the minute you're like, I'm going to publish this thing, you are applying for a job. And I don't care whether we are traditionally publishing or self-publishing this thing. The minute you commit to publishing, you are taking on another job. And if you are not mentally prepared for that, forget financial for a minute, just mentally prepared for that, this is going to be very stressful and very difficult. Because you're going to have to deal with rejection, you're going to have to deal with other people's timelines, you're going to have to deal with other people's feedback and other people's opinions, and they're going to seem far more certain and far more rigorous and far more aggressive than yours. Because other people in this process are just looking to make a product. And they just want to sell that product, particularly true in traditional publishing. They don't really care how hard you worked on it. They're not your friends. They're going to tell you that they're your best pals on social media and how they love you and how you're just the greatest. But you are the cow and they want the milk. So while you might be enamored with them because they are handing you money, they could replace you. Don't get attached. It's a job. If you're going to put your love somewhere, you're going to put your investment of time and care, it's in the writing. Everything else is the job. Traditionally publishing is going to take time. Your queries are going to suck for a while, and then all of a sudden you're just going to throw everything at the wall and go, hell with it, I'm just going to say it. And those are going to be your best queries. And then from then on out, you're going to realize how it's unpleasant. Nobody likes to query. I do, but I'm weird. But it's not as scary the second, third, fifth, 20th times at this point. In fact, it's just kind of like, oh God, I got to query. It's more of a nuisance. And then you query and then you get put on somebody else's timeline and they follow and they tell you what to do. And you will see money infrequently and in various amounts, but you'll be published. Yahtzee. But let's suppose you want to self-publish this thing. Well, then you get to move into a dual role, which excites me. Because once the book is done and polished and it's in the best shape, you get to both be a publisher and do the publishing stuff, and you get to be a marketer. Now, I want to be real clear. Hang on, music. I want to be real clear here. Just because you're going to go traditional publishing does not absolve you of the responsibility of marketing. It's just that you're going to do it later rather than earlier. Everybody markets. All right, so you are going to start marketing, but we don't have a published book. What are we going to market? You're going to market the process. You're going to market your expertise as a writer. You are the best person suited to write your work. You will always sound like you. You know your work the best. You know how hard it was. There's definitely stuff you can talk about there. So talk about it. And if you're about to get all precious about spoilers, no one gives a shit about spoilers. Not in publishing. Consumers care about spoilers because they have an expectation of wanting the emotional journey. But your publisher, you don't want a spoiler warning on your publisher because the publisher needs to sell the book. Same with your pimp, agent. But by and large, yeah, they don't want you to be precious about spoilers. It's just a part of the job. They know how the sausage gets made. They're in the business of making it. You don't have to be secret about it. When you market this thing, you are marketing not only the book and its contents, but you and your process. So start with you and your process. Gather people around you. Gather an audience. Gather some email addresses. Gather people who will support you. Sometimes there's going to be some overlap with the people who are also writing concurrent to you. But this also includes the people you're going to branch out from and just be consumers. And that takes practice and that takes time and it's hard and it's frustrating and it's very slow. And I realize I'm saying this to a room with like 8 viewers. It's slow. It just takes time and then one day it catches on. It just takes time. I'm saying that as much to me as I am to you. But you start your marketing, and then once the book rolls out, the next thing you're going to want to do in that publishing world is get a cover. And I need you to prepare for a 3 to 4 digit invoice for your cover cost. Because artists are precious, and when you find a good one, you're going to pay. Just like editors. Because they're good at their craft. Be willing to pay more for your cover, even if they lowball you a price, which regrettably a lot will. Be willing to pay them more and then tell them to up their price. And if they're not sure of what to up their price to, have them come talk to me and I will show them the math. So you're going to spend on a cover because the cover is going to be one of the biggest factors. Traditional publishing will do this for you, but the cover is one of the big factors that helps convert sales. Big cover, detailed cover. Cover that evokes an image. Partner that with a strong title that evokes something with potential. There's your book. Then you're going to write a back blurb, which is basically like a query letter, but instead of trying to get published, you're trying to sell the book. And you don't need the same business details that you do in a query because the title of the book is on the front, so you don't need to mention the title of the book in your back blurb. And no one gives a shit about word count as a consumer, so you don't need to mention word count. And people pretty much picked up the book because they knew what genre it was, so you don't need to mention the genre either. But when you're writing a back blurb, you need to speak to that consumer who's interested in the potential of your story. Now, the old sloppy way to do this was to go crazy with ellipses. Can Bridget survive, ... another night in terror, ... Or will she thrive, ? and then you just frame like a confetti, a coleslaw of ellipses and question marks. That's the old way. That's how they taught me how to do it in the 90s. Thank God we've moved on to like actual sentences and paragraphs. And you just shape and frame this. Oh, that's cute. You shape and frame the story so that the potential is, yes, it sounds very Shatner, very Walker, very Walken, very stiff and stilted. It's just messy. Also, you set off the bot. Good job. You'll be fine. It'll pass. No, it's fine. The bot forgives you. I forgive you. But I see what you were doing. The idea being you want to appeal to the idea that there could be a story between these covers. It's a lot more open-ended. It's not a summary. You write a blurb. Your first blurbs are going to suck. Everybody's blurb sucks. If possible, farm your blurbs out to somebody else. It's worth paying the money because it just helps. You package that together with a title, with a cover, slap a price on it, and then you get to sell it. And you write sales copy, which is going to be, by the way, writing book sales copy is going to be its own Monday night topic at some point. It might be next Monday. It might be the Monday coming up, which, if we're looking at the calendar, at the time I am recording this, I might just do book sales copy on September the 27th because I don't have a topic for that one yet. I might just do it then. Yeah, I might do it then. We'll see. I will make that decision tomorrow, probably. Feel free to leave comments here or on the Discord, and I'll happily solicit opinions. But that's the traditional, that's the self-publishing side. Now, traditional publishing is doing all that stuff. They're getting it edited, they're applying another edit for you. They're going to deal with a cover. They're going to deal with a back blurb. They're going to deal with a title. They're going to handle all those things so that presumably you're free to move on to the next book they will probably either want from you or that you will want for yourself. And then you can also help market it because the vast majority of traditional publishing, all the marketing is now firmly in the hands of the author, because the expectation in traditional publishing is that you are coming to traditional publishing with an audience of some degree already on board. And if you're not, or if it's real low, read real low as under 50 people, then they're going to try and do what they can to kind of not avoid publishing you, but certainly not promote it to the degree it should be. Because if you only, let's say you're bringing, let's just do some numbers, right? Let's say you've got an audience of definitely 45 people. All right. But somebody else's book comes in at the same time as you, gets finished and put together at pretty much the same time as you, but they have an audience of 2,000 people. Who do you think they're going to get more attention towards? Because, well, 2,000 is bigger than 40. And they have a better chance of making their money back if they sell 2,000 copies to 2,000 people. So build your audience, which is why way back you wanted to start talking about your process and your efforts. Because that way the consumer, the potential consumer, much like a character in your book, can attach to you and your journey, just like your character and their plot. And they can relate, and in that relationship, they can create context. See how we tie it all together in about 2 hours? Fantasy is one of the most, what's the word I want to use? Crowded? Crowded might be generous. Fantasy is one of the most packed genres because it's one of the biggest umbrellas with a million things underneath it. And so many authors have very particular definitions of, here's what I'm writing. It's urban fantasy, so it's got to be a detective. It doesn't, but that's what people tend to think of, which is just one facet. Detective urban fiction Urban fantasy is one part of urban fantasy. The other part of urban fantasy is just urban fantasy. It's also where you get like cyberpunk or the Matrix. The breadth of things that fantasy can encompass can easily intimidate a lot of people. And I don't blame writers for getting freaked out. I don't blame writers for being all like, "Oh my God, there's a million things I have to deal with. Where do I begin?" And that's exactly why I want to do this series, because I want to tell you where to begin. I want to give you a little roadmap, a little bit of a different roadmap every week. So tonight, just to recap before we get out of here, we talked about story Bibles and some basic development and how to avoid a couple tropes and how to build your voice and focusing on your writing and when to market and what to market and how to roll things together. And then layering upon layering upon layering, we eventually get to, okay, we're going to market it. How do we market it? We're going to talk about who to market it to. And all these different things will come up in lots of different ways. We're covering this with fantasy. The next thing we're going to talk about after fantasy is science fiction. But instead of covering the same ground with science fiction, I want to spend part of science fiction talking about some of the deeper writing stuff, like theme and voice. Because those things they're equally as present in fantasy, but I want to focus them because they're often more visible in science fiction. So that's part of what the science fiction discussion is going to be. Do I know when that's going to be, episode 2? I don't know yet. Keep coming back to the channel and I'll tell you. And then after that, we're going to do romance and we'll talk about character development. But we're moving through genres and we're covering different things so that you get a full toolbox. Because that's what I want. And I like talking about this stuff. All right. It is now just about 9 o'clock. It's been about 2 hours. It's been an hour and 50 something minutes. Any questions? Let's take questions for 5 minutes. Questions about anything related to this. Whoever asked me the root beer question, yeah. But ask me whatever you want about this. 5 minutes. Let's go. Also gives me a chance to drink more water. Is this another one of those cases where I've just deluged people with information? It's the one thing I'm not going to apologize for. I'm just not. It's what I'm here for. I'm here to dispense info. I've been writing for a while, and I always hate my rough drafts despite liking the ideas. What should I do? Keep writing. It's okay to hate your rough drafts. That doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It just means you hate your rough drafts. The question for you, the question to take away with that is, when does your rough draft become a better draft? Or are you just going to hate the draft because you don't like the activity? When is it okay to be a draft writer? When is it okay to have written something? When are you going to give yourself that permission? That's the question. Because the ideas aren't the problem. Ideas aren't the problem at all. The issue is how you are considering the drafting process. Chances are you are disliking the drafting process because you are letting doubt come in and go, I don't know if it's any good. I love the idea, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. You are the only one who can do it right. Other people can do it different. Some people can't even do it at all. But you are the only one who can do it the way you need to do it. So give yourself permission to write drafts. For the self-publishing marketing process, in what draft do you start marketing? After the second? The vast majority of self-publishing authors I know, especially the ones who are trying to self-publish their first book, would really benefit from developing marketing after the second draft. only because they've got a lot of ground to cover in that marketing. They've got to grow the audience. They've got to get used to doing the marketing and talking about themselves as successful and talking about their efforts as being productive and talk about their process. They're new at this. There's a lot of stuff to learn and a lot of stuff to like figure out how to make their own. So you never want to market out of your first draft because you might have a better idea come around later. And you never want to market that early because it's going to sound, when you start marketing, it's going to sound like it's more complete and more ready to go than it is. So a first draft, since it's really still finding its footing and figuring out how to connect, you don't want to tie your horse to it. You want to make sure you get to that second draft where things are a bit more stable. Second draft. Good question. Anything else? I always feel like my writing is subpar and doesn't convey the draft idea in an adequate way. Well, shit, I hate to tell you that your writing is not subpar. I've read your writing. It's not subpar. If you're making the decision that your writing is subpar before you let other people read it, how are they supposed to feel? Would it be okay if somebody else liked your work? Would you be brave enough to let them like your work? There's a difference between I have this idea and I don't know how to translate it into words, and I have this idea and I don't think the words I have do a good job. If you don't know how to translate the idea into words, that's why we have multiple drafts. That's why we talk to more people and solicit more opinions and try to cobble things together. If you don't think you're doing a good enough job, add more words. In either case, the answer is to just keep writing, produce more, and be willing to be good at it. Not because, oh my God, I have suffered and labored mightily over these drafts, but just that you're doing okay. The world's not on fire. I mean, it is, but not in the draft. Like, you're not totally screwing everything up. Let it be better than subpar. You're not gaining anything by holding yourself to a too rigid a standard other than giving yourself a reason to never succeed. You don't have to be that hard on yourself for it. If you don't think it's good enough, keep writing until it is. Talk to somebody who can help you do that. Get multiple opinions. Try coming at it in a couple different ways. But if you're always going to default to, my writing sucks, you're going to struggle in this whole job. Also, your writing is not subpar. You're too hard on yourself. It's just not subpar. I've read your stuff. It's not subpar. I have read subpar. Yours is not subpar. If it were subpar, I would have steered you towards simpler writing concepts. Because there's just no other reason. Like, you got to give yourself some credit. Everybody, give yourself some credit. You're trying to do a hard thing. You're trying to be vulnerable. You're trying to be creative. You're trying to create a thing so that other people can be affected by it. That is not a simple task. Give yourself some credit. When in doubt, add more air horns. All right. You're welcome. I have just cooked my voice. I've been going since, 16 hours. I've been at this desk about 16 hours. So I'm calling it a day. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for checking out episode 1 of How Do I Write This? The next time I'm here streaming will be on Monday. Will be on September the 27th, and we will probably do just how to write some book marketing. We'll probably cover back blurbs. We'll probably cover how to write marketing stuff because that's a nice, straightforward thing. It's a little bit, one of the problems just with that idea is that a lot of people who want to do it, you're not done writing your thing yet. Like, you're still in the middle of your second draft and we're already talking about marketing. Like, you've got to figure out your second act. But I am happy to put together a 2-hour recording on marketing. No problem. We'll do that on Monday. The chat, last night's writer's chat is up now on YouTube. Just type in my name It'll come right up. And I think I have to make a YouTube command for Twitch. I'll do that tomorrow morning if I haven't done it already. But yeah, next week's chat, I'll be right here. Is it here? Yeah, I need to make a YouTube. I will do a YouTube. I'll put that on my list. But everything from the last week or so is up now on YouTube. This, what you're listening to right now, will go up on YouTube tomorrow, probably around lunchtime, middle of the day, noonish, noon Eastern, just to be clear. And Patreon people, if you're hanging out, well, thank you. I appreciate being the #1 writing streamer on Twitch. I am certainly the #1 writing streamer on Twitch who's not currently on camera. So I'll take that. Thanks. Patreon people, you can expect The Green Knight, which is this week's film. Expect that in your inbox when you wake up in the morning. So within 5 hours, it should be there, if not sooner. So enjoy that. Other than that, guys, if you need anything, come find me in all my respective channels. Discord, write me an email, find me on Twitter, etc. Tell your friends. We hit 11 viewers at one point, and I'm super pumped about that. I would love to hit 12. Don't forget to follow. It's free if you're not already. And if you're a Prime person, feel free to throw your one free Prime sub my way. It helps feed the cats, frankly. It really does. It cuts like my cat food bill like in half if I can get to 20 subscribers. It'd be great. Yeah. So I will see you guys. Well, you should be inspired, damn it. Like you're good enough to do stuff. You should be inspired. It's good. So I will see you guys next week. I'm thinking about theme music just for Monday nights. I'm on the fence. It depends on my budget because the one beat I want to get is like $40 and I don't have $40, but we'll cross that bridge later. All right. I will see you guys next week. I'm pressing the button, and we're getting out of here. I love you all. You're amazing. Please keep writing. Please keep making art. And I will talk to you very, very soon. Also, next Monday, I will tell you the Sia story. But we'll get there. We'll do that next Monday. All right. See ya!